Good afternoon. Speaking to you from planet Earth on the continent of North America, the western part of New York State, Rochester, New York, in the Star Theater of the Rochester Museum and Science Center Strassenberg Planetarium. I'm Steve Fentress, honored to be your planetarium director, and I'm here with our Master of Social Media, Felicia Schwarzenberg, to look at this big story this week about whether signs of life have been found on the planet Venus. Venus, by the way, will be here for a few minutes, and we welcome questions relevant to the topic in the comments, and Felicia will pass them on to me, the best of them, in a few minutes. Venus, you can see it in the sky. You might have been seeing it already. If you've been getting up early in the morning and looking east, there is something that looks like an unbelievably bright white star. It's rising after about 4 o'clock, and it's there all the way till sunrise. And that's Venus, second planet out from our sun. It looks really bright. It looks bright because it's close to us in space. It is the next planet in from us toward the sun. And it's bright because its atmosphere is filled with almost perfectly white clouds. Beautiful at a distance, but those clouds are droplets of sulfuric acid in an atmosphere of carbon dioxide. Down at the surface, the pressure is something like 100 times the pressure here on Earth. The temperature is about 900 degrees day and night on the surface. So in our whirlwind tours of the solar system, we often dismiss Venus as the horrible planet and don't worry about looking there for life. But up higher in the atmosphere, 30 miles up or so, the temperatures and the pressures are more modest, maybe more like what we have here. And so the news this week is that that might be where this molecule called phosphine was found. An international team of 19 astronomers, and I have their paper right here, led by Professor Jane Greaves of the University of Cardiff in Wales and 19 others, by the way, almost half of them women, put out this article in Nature Astronomy, Phosphine Gas in the Cloud Decks of Venus. Why is this significant? Phosphine is a chemical that on Earth is made by some kinds of bacteria. It is a molecule that is not easy to make, and we don't know of other processes that could make as much phosphine as Professor Greaves and this team found in the atmosphere of Venus. They found this using 2 different telescopes on 2 different occasions, so that's one reason to take this result seriously, is that they checked themselves. These were telescopes that look at microwave energy. So these are waves that are longer than the waves that you and I can see, almost as long as radio waves. And it turns out that molecules of this substance, phosphine, absorb a certain wavelength of microwaves, and that can be detected by radio telescopes. So the 19 authors announced that they had found phosphine in the atmosphere of Venus, that it's very interesting. They had actually been looking for phosphine, considering phosphine for quite a while, because it could be a biosignature gas. So this is a concept we're going to be hearing more and more about. If we're looking for life elsewhere, how do we find it? Well, if you're close, you can just look and see it. I'm looking across the room and there's Felicia, and I can see that she's there, another life form. But if you're hundreds of millions of miles away, that might not be possible. So another strategy is to look for biosignatures. One kind of biosignature could be a technosignature. If you have an intelligent civilization that is generating radio waves or even sending out messages or doing something else that is obviously a sign of technology, then maybe you can detect that. But another way of searching is for biosignature gases. Gases that you would be able to find at a distance in a planet's atmosphere, gases that would be caused by living things there. The ideal biosignature gas, as the Greaves team explains, is something that is where the signal is unmistakable and could not be made by anything other than living things. And that's the ideal. Phosphine is pretty close, because in the conditions of the atmosphere of Venus, where there is very little hydrogen, this is an atom that's made of or a molecule made of one phosphorus atom attached to 3 hydrogen atoms. It's not an easy molecule to make in the conditions of Venus. So the scientists considered, okay, what processes on Venus could make phosphine? They considered volcanoes, they considered lightning strikes, they considered meteoroid impacts, they considered the atmosphere response to sunlight, and none of these processes could produce as much phosphine as they observed in their microwave observations. So that leaves life open as a possibility for the source of the phosphine on Venus. Where would these living things be? Well, maybe living in liquid droplets in the clouds up at this moderate level 30 miles or so above the surface. There is little hope of life of the kind we know surviving at the conditions, in the conditions that are found on the surface. So maybe up in the atmosphere. And scientists have actually been thinking about that possibility for a long time. None less a person than Carl Sagan wrote about this possibility back in the 1960s. So Professor Greaves and her colleagues had been considering biosignature gases for many years and had settled on phosphine as a gas worth looking for. And so they booked time on these 2 different microwave telescopes to examine Venus. So I'm going to step over to the internet controls here, because one thing we can look at is how this came out in the news. And a lot of people saw it first with a headline in the New York Times, which we will bring up here. So this is from, I think, Tuesday morning. Life on Venus, astronomers see a signal in its clouds. And it's kind of that's a really provocative statement. Life on Venus, putting a question mark after it doesn't make it all that much less provocative. The writers of this New York Times story, Shannon Sterone is a young freelance writer who specializes, among other things, in planetary science topics. Kenneth Chang is a New York Times writer who specializes in the solar system. Dennis Overby, I happen to have spent some time with at a conference at the University of Chicago a couple of years ago. And I can tell you he takes his job very seriously. In person, he speaks very quietly and very carefully, and it's important to him to get the story right and get it accurate. So this is a trustworthy story, even though the headline is a little bit exciting there. Now, Overby comes from a school of science writing where it is important for the writer to have mastered the subject enough to really select exactly the right words to characterize what the discovery or the finding is. I bring that up because there's a kind of a different style that you can find if you look at, say, the Planetary Society. Now, the Planetary Society is a political advocacy group, but they are very good at explaining planetary science. And here's the article by their writer, Casey Dreyer. The Planetary Society voice is different from the authoritative voice of Overby in the New York Times. The Planetary Society is more willing to say, well, here's what we understand is going on so far, and here's how we interpret it as we are learning about it. So that's kind of a different voice, a different style. If you want to find out more about it, you can Google Royal Astronomical Society Venus, and it'll be right there. It was the Royal Astronomical Society that put together the announcement. They have several excellent web pages with frequently asked questions. If you Google RAS Venus, you will see links to videos. There's a 1-minute version, a 5-minute version, and then the full 70-minute press conference with Professor Greaves and other representatives of the team explaining the finding in detail and taking questions. What else did I want to show you here? If you want to, another excellent place to go. The SETI Institute in California has a podcast called Big Picture Science, hosted by Seth Shostak and Molly Bentley. And I just listened to this in the car on the way home. This is their very latest one, in which they interview, as you can see there, Dr. Sousa Silva, Professor Seeger, and Dr. Cabral and Dr. Grinspoon. All of these people are experts, either participants in the research or experts on the planet Venus. Really good interviews in the podcast, Big Picture Science, the latest episode, Life on Venus.
If you would like to see Venus for yourself, you can scout around. The best pictures of Venus from spacecraft are now coming from a Japanese spacecraft called Akatsuki, which has been in orbit around Venus for quite a while. Has cameras taking beautiful pictures, including pictures taken with ultraviolet light, which are showing features in the atmosphere that haven't been seen before. And there is, as always, the NASA Planetary Photojournal website, which will have all the best pictures from NASA planetary space missions going back to the very beginning of the space age. So where are we now? What's the significance of this? Let's get a nice picture of Venus up there that we can look at while we think about this. The significance is that we have now expanded our realm of worlds in our solar system to take seriously when we're thinking about the possibility of life. Before, when we talked about where in our solar system might there be life now, or might there have been life in the past, we've talked about Mars, of course. We've talked about some moons in the outer solar system, Europa, Enceladus, Titan, but now Venus has moved up on the list. The scientists who wrote this paper were very clear in all their public statements. They are not announcing that they have found life on Venus. What they have found is the presence of this phosphine gas, and they have looked for every other possible explanation for the amount of phosphine that's in the atmosphere, and they can't find an explanation that comes up with as much phosphine as they found. The one possibility then that stays open is that some life form might be in liquid droplets in the clouds, life form, microscopic life forms, single-cell organisms, producing this phosphine in the way that some bacteria on Earth produce it. So the last question we often get in these interviews is essentially, what emotion are we supposed to feel right now? And of course there's excitement, but you've got to be careful about excitement. Excitement can lead to haste, selective listening, wishful thinking, mistakes. I like to go back to the famous quote from Carl Sagan, who was primarily a planetary scientist and a particular expert on Venus. He said, "Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence." So that's where we are. We're going to be wanting to find out more about Venus in the next few years. And Felicia, do we have any questions from the comments section?
We do have one. How will this affect the search for extraterrestrial life going forward?
How will this affect the search for extraterrestrial life going forward? There are already a couple of projects, including a couple of privately funded projects, to send space probes to Venus to get into the atmosphere, because that's what we need to do next, is not just look at it from a distance, but get maybe a balloon or something into the atmosphere at that nice level where these, if there are living things, might be, or where the phosphine is. Dr. Greaves and the other team have explained, we don't really even now have a detailed measurement of all the gases that are in the Venusian atmosphere and how they interact. So there's much more to be learned now, and Venus has moved up as a priority target.
And then another question is, if Venus is such a hostile environment, how can we make technology to sustain that environment, to study the planet?
So on the surface, it's an extremely hostile environment, and the Russian Soviet space program has attempted a couple of times to put landers on the surface. The United States has never attempted to land on Venus. Russia has a couple of times. They've had a couple of landers that have been able to survive the heat and the pressure and the acid for a short time before they broke down. So technology down on the surface is really, really hard because it's a horrible environment. So that's why scientists are going to be looking for anything that could fly up high in the atmosphere, in the clouds. You still have the acid to deal with, but at least not quite the extremes of pressure and temperature.
All right, and the last question is, do you think the international space community will sort of come together and work more closely together on this project to figure out if there is life on Venus?
Will the international space community come together to work on this project and find out if there is life on Venus?
Short answer is definitely yes, because this is the kind of thing, it's a measurement that was very carefully done. They used 2 different telescopes at 2 different times and got the same result, used 2 different methods of analyzing the data. In their paper, they have links to all their raw data, so anybody who wants to reanalyze it in their own way and criticize it is welcome to do that. There's links to the computer code they use to analyze the data. So this is a pretty solid result that there is this phosphine in the atmosphere. And they also linked to all their work on trying to find any other explanation for how that phosphine got to be there. So now Venus is established as a scientific priority. And I think the things to look for in the near future will be privately funded research projects. Maybe they can move faster than NASA or the other government agencies. And look for collaborations with Russian scientists, because over the last few decades it's kind of been America focusing on Mars and Russia focusing on Venus. And so it's going to be very interesting to see whether Venus becomes more of a joint international target than it has.
All right, and then just to wrap things up, aside from the websites you showed us earlier, is there anywhere else that people can go to learn more information about this?
I would suggest all these scientists are very articulate. So Jane Greaves, Sarah Seeger, a well-known expert in exoplanets, has several video interviews up there. And you can't do better. She's very good at explaining it, and of course she's in on the research. Of course, we will be showing you how to see Venus in the sky in all our star shows here at the planetarium. So you're welcome to come back and see one of those. Venus is going to be really bright in the morning sky right up until December. So if you're getting up early, you have a cheery, bright light to look at, and now a new way to think about it.
All right.
So are we about out of time?
Yep, we are good unless anyone has any last minute questions. Doesn't look like it.
I can sort of tread water here for a second because I know there's a delay with Facebook Live. Come on back for planetarium shows. We are also working on a schedule of online programs, particularly courses for students, teenagers, maybe for kids who are doing things after school, and also for homeschool programs. We are working on that now. Keep an eye on rmsc.org. That's where the news will be. We hope to get those going within the next 2 or 3 weeks or so. But come on to the planetarium any weekend and see a star show and find out how to find Venus.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much, Steve. You have many thank yous coming from the comments section.
Thank you, commenters. Thank you, Felicia. And maybe we'll see you all here at the planetarium. Come on and see Carl. He's not going anywhere really soon. Have a good afternoon.